Hey guys, welcome back to Vanished Lands. They set sail across a vast ocean, chasing a dream that promised glory, freedom, and a new beginning. 120 souls, men, women, and children, left everything behind to carve out a life in the untamed wilderness of a new world. But what awaited them was not paradise. It was silence, for when their governor returned years later, the colony was gone, home stood empty. Tools lay abandoned. Not a single body remained. It was as if an entire people had dissolved into air, leaving behind only one word carved into a tree, CROATOAN. What happened on that island has never been explained. Some believe the settlers were taken by hunger, war, or disease. Others whisper of curses, ancient spirits, or doorways into worlds beyond our own. The truth may be stranger than anyone dares to imagine. Tonight, you will walk with them. You will hear their hopes, their fears, and their final whispers as the colony fades into legend. This is not just a story of a disappearance. It is a story of a colony that never truly left. It was the late 16th century, a time when the world was still half hidden in shadow. Maps were not truths but guesses, their blank spaces filled with dragons, sea serpents, and the words, "Here be monsters." To the west stretched the Atlantic Ocean, an endless expanse of dark, rolling water, feared by sailors, but also whispered of as a road to fortune. And across that water lay something England hungered for, the New World. Spain had already grown rich beyond measure. Gold and silver flowed back from its colonies in the Americas like rivers of light. Its galleons returned loaded with treasures, fueling the empire of a mighty king. England, by contrast, was small, proud, and restless. Queen Elizabeth sat upon the throne, her eyes fixed beyond the horizon. She wanted glory, she wanted power, and she wanted to carve her nation's name into lands no Englishman had yet claimed. But this dream was not the Queen's alone. Merchants smelled opportunity. Nobles longed for fame. Ordinary men and women, burdened by poverty, disease, and uncertainty, were willing to risk everything for a new life across the sea. What awaited them, none could truly say. Some spoke of fertile lands, filled with endless forests and rivers that gleamed like silver. Others whispered of danger, hostile tribes, strange sicknesses, and curses older than memory. Yet hope is a powerful force, stronger even than fear. And so the dream was born, a colony on the edge of the unknown, a foothold for England in the New World. A place that would prove the strength of a kingdom rising against the might of Spain. Ships were prepared. Supplies were gathered. Families were chosen, not just soldiers and adventurers, but men, women, and children. This would not be a mere outpost of war. It was meant to be a settlement, a home, a living testament to England's ambition. 120 souls, each of them daring to step into the void of history. Picture them now, standing upon the docks of England as dawn broke over gray waters. The air smelled of salt and smoke. Gulls wheeled overhead, their cries lost in the clamor of ship bells and shouted orders. Mothers clutched their children. Fathers tightened their grip on worn satchels. Some smiled with excitement. Others trembled with dread. Behind them lay the only world they had ever known. Ahead of them stretched the unknown. The ships rocked at anchor, their wooden hulls groaning like beasts eager to move. Sails furled tight, masts stabbing at the sky. They looked both fragile and unyielding. To cross the Atlantic was no simple thing. The voyage could last months. Storms could shatter masts like twigs. Hunger could gnaw through even the strongest man. But these settlers carried with them something more enduring than food or timber. They carried the fire of belief. Belief that they were chosen. Belief that across that ocean lay a destiny meant for them alone. And so, with prayers murmured and tears shed, the settlers boarded, the ships cast off, sails catching the wind like the wings of some great bird. The docks receded, the cries of farewell faded, and England slipped behind them like a dream dissolving into mist. Before them stretched nothing but water and sky. Day after day, the ocean surrounded them. The horizon stretched endlessly, a circle from which there was no escape. At times the sea was calm, a mirror of blue that lulled even the anxious to peace. At other times it rose in fury, waves crashing against the hull as though the ocean itself sought to claim them. Lightning split the heavens, thunder rolled like the voice of an angry god, and sailors whispered prayers into the howling wind. Strange sights were reported during those nights. Some swore they saw glowing shapes beneath the waves, like lanterns moving in the deep. Others told of phantom ships appearing in the distance, only to vanish when pursued. A child awoke screaming one night, saying he'd seen faces staring at him through the planks of the hull, faces pale and drawn, as if drowned long ago. The crew laughed nervously, but no one slept easily, yet still they pressed on. Each morning brought them closer to a land none had seen, yet all imagined, around barrels of dried meat and stale bread. Settlers whispered of what awaited them: rich soil, tall trees, rivers filled with fish. A paradise where a man could own land of his own, where children could grow free, where hunger and disease could be left behind. They dreamed of a future their old world could never give them. But beneath these dreams lay unspoken fears. What if the new world was not paradise but a trap? What if the land itself rejected them, as if some ancient force waited for intruders to cross the line? No one spoke it openly, but in the long hours of the night, when the sea was black and the stars cold, such thoughts could not be banished. Weeks turned into months. The settlers endured hunger, sickness, and despair. Yet at last, one morning, a cry went up from the crow's nest. Land! Hearts leapt. The long voyage was at an end. Before them lay a stretch of coast, wild and untamed, forests running down to water, rivers glimmering in the sun, birds wheeled overhead, their wings flashing silver. The settlers crowded the deck, gazing in awe. To them it was as if a new Eden had risen from the sea. But even as they rejoiced, a shadow fell across the dream. For though the land was beautiful, it was also silent. No voices, no laughter, no smoke from distant fires. The forest stood still, the rivers ran quiet, and the air itself seemed to hold its breath. It was as if the land had been waiting, watching. The settlers did not see it then in their joy. But the new world was not empty. It had a past far older than their ships, older than their kingdom, older perhaps than memory itself. The soil they stepped upon carried secrets, and those secrets did not welcome them. The colony was founded with hope, with courage, with all the frailty and strength of humankind. They built homes. They planted crops. They tried to carve a life from the wilderness. Yet every hammer strike echoed into silence. Every fire seemed too small against the dark of the forest. And every night, when the wind rose through the trees, it carried a sound they could not explain. Something between a whisper and a sigh. England celebrated the attempt, proud of its brave colonists. The Queen believed her dream was taking root. But what no one knew, not the settlers, not the sailors, not the leaders who had sent them, was that this colony would not endure. This dream would not blossom. It would vanish. Vanish so completely that centuries later, the world would still ask, what happened to them? For when the ships returned to England, they left behind 120 souls on the edge of the unknown. Men, women, and children who believed they were building a future. They did not know that the sea which carried their governor away would also carry away their only lifeline. They did not know they would become a whisper, a shadow, a question without an answer. When those ships vanished over the horizon, they left behind a colony destined to disappear forever. When the ships at last anchored near the coast and the settlers prepared to set foot on their new home, they were not greeted with cheering crowds, nor the warmth of familiar soil. Instead, they faced an island wrapped in silence. Roanoke, to the hopeful eyes of the colonists, it appeared as a paradise, green forests stretching endlessly, rivers winding like silver threads, and meadows kissed by sunlight. Yet to others, the silence was not peace, but warning. For there are places where the air feels too still, where the earth itself seems to hold its breath. Roanoke was one of them. The settlers disembarked with eager hearts. Some fell to their knees and kissed the ground, giving thanks for safe passage. Children ran toward the trees, laughing, chasing each other with the relief of touching solid earth again. Mothers gathered herbs and flowers, marveling at their colors. Fathers examined the soil, certain that crops would thrive here. After months of terror on the open sea, the island seemed to offer everything: safety, abundance, renewal. But as the sun dipped lower and shadows thickened beneath the trees, that first joy began to falter. The forest pressed close to the settlement site, its trees tall and ancient, their branches woven so tightly they blocked out the sky. Strange cries echoed from within, cries not quite animal, not quite human. The settlers froze, listening. Somewhere deep in the foliage, something moved. Leaves rustled where no wind blew. The forest seemed alive, not in the gentle way of birds and deer, but with a darker pulse, as though it watched and waited. At night, the island revealed its other face. The settlers lit fires to ward off the dark, but the flames only seemed to deepen the shadows. Owls called in eerie rhythms. Unlike those in England, wolves howled, their voices rising and falling as though mocking the strangers who dared intrude. Then came the lights, faint at first, drifting between the trees like lanterns carried by unseen hands. They appeared and vanished without reason, moving in silence, never drawing near, yet never truly leaving. Some settlers claimed the lights beckoned, pulsing softly like a heartbeat, leading deeper into the forest. One young woman told of seeing figures within the glow, shapes of men and women dressed not in feathers or furs, but in garments she swore were older, stranger, unlike any culture she had known. They seemed to float, their faces pale, their eyes dark pools of emptiness. She tried to follow, but her husband seized her arm and dragged her back to camp. When she turned, the lights were gone. She said no more of it, but her eyes often wandered toward the trees after that, as if something still called to her. By day, Roanoke was no less unsettling. The wildlife was plentiful, but it did not behave as expected. Birds flew in patterns that seemed deliberate, almost ritualistic, circling the settlement before vanishing into the trees. Deer stood at the edges of the clearings, watching in unnatural silence, their eyes reflecting too much light. More than once, hunters swore they saw the same stag, marked with a scar across its flank, following them no matter where they went. The native tribes of the region knew of the island, but they did not claim it. When asked, they grew silent, shaking their heads. Some whispered that Roanoke was a place where the boundary between worlds grew thin, a place where the spirits of the restless walked freely. Others warned of curses older than memory, woven into the soil itself. They told the settlers plainly they could plant their homes anywhere else, but not here. Roanoke was not for the living. Yet the settlers, blinded by hope, dismissed these warnings. To them, it was rich land, unclaimed and fertile. They built shelters, laid out farms, and spoke of the bright future ahead. To admit fear would be to admit failure, and failure was unthinkable. England expected success, and so they called the island paradise, convincing themselves that the whispers in the night were nothing but wind, that the strange lights were tricks of the eye. They tried to ignore the feeling of being watched. Still, unease spread like a shadow through their ranks. Children began waking in the night, crying that voices whispered their names from the forest. Men returned from hunting with stories of paths that shifted, trails that led them in circles until they stumbled back to camp disoriented and pale. One man swore he heard laughter, low, mocking laughter, carried on the wind though he was alone. Dreams, too, became poisoned. Women dreamed of drowning in black water, while pale hands pulled them under. Men dreamed of walking through endless trees, always following faint lights, until they awoke standing outside their huts barefoot, with no memory of how they got there. A boy was found one dawn wandering near the shore, whispering in a tongue no one recognized. His eyes stared blankly ahead, and for hours he could not be roused from his trance. The settlers tried to strengthen their spirits with prayer. They gathered by firelight, singing hymns that cracked the silence. Yet even these seemed swallowed by the island, as if Roanoke devoured sound itself. Their voices never echoed, never carried. It was as though the air refused to let them rise. One evening, an elder among the natives approached quietly. He stood at the edge of the settlement, not crossing the invisible boundary between cleared land and forest. His eyes were dark, solemn, filled with pity. Through a translator, he gave a final warning. He spoke of the island as a place where the dead walked, a place where ancient ones, neither gods nor men, still lingered. He told them that every tree had roots tangled in bones, Every stone had been witness to blood. To stay was to surrender themselves to forces that could not be reasoned with. Then he turned and vanished into the night, leaving the settlers trembling. But pride is a heavy anchor. The settlers could not leave. They had crossed the ocean to build a new life, and to abandon it so soon would mean disgrace. And so they stayed. They worked harder, built stronger shelters, planted more crops. They told themselves that fear was weakness, that the warnings were superstition. But the island whispered, and whispers have a way of being heard. The longer they stayed, the stronger the presence became. Some swore they saw faces watching them from the tree-line, faces that melted back into bark when approached. Others heard footsteps pacing outside their huts at night, though no tracks remained in the morning. The settlers grew weary, paranoid, snapping at one another. Even the children became silent, wide-eyed, as though they sensed what their parents would not admit. And then came the first sign that could not be ignored. One morning, as dawn bled into the horizon, the settlers awoke to find the livestock pens empty. Goats, pigs, and chickens all gone. The pens were intact, no sign of struggle, no broken wood or spilled feed. It was as if the animals had simply vanished. Tracks in the dirt led only a few paces before fading into nothing. The settlers searched the island, but there was no trace. That night, from a forest, they heard the faint bleating of goats. But when torches were raised and men entered the woods, the sounds retreated, always just beyond reach, until finally they fell silent. Fear grew heavier. Supplies dwindled. Whispers multiplied. And though no one dared say it aloud, every settler felt it. The island did not want them. Yet still they stayed, trapped between hope and dread, unable to admit defeat, unwilling to turn back. They clung to the dream, even as the dream soured. But dreams, when poison, can become nightmares. And so it began, not with thunder or fire, not with sudden violence, but with small, quiet vanishings, each one chipping away at the fragile hope that held the colony together. One by one, the first signs of the curse began to show themselves. The first weeks on Roanoke had been filled with fragile hope, though the island whispered with unease. The settlers clung to belief that hard work would tame it. They built homes, cleared fields, and prayed their efforts would turn the wilderness into a New England across the sea. But hope has limits, and Roanoke was patient. As the months wore on, the settlers began to feel the weight of the island pressing upon them. The soil that had seemed rich at first yielded little. Crops sprouted thin and sickly. The summer heat scorched what little grew, and rains came too late or too heavy, drowning seedlings before they could bear fruit. Hunters who once returned with venison began to return empty-handed. The forest, abundant in appearance, withheld its gifts. Food grew scarce. Families rationed what little remained from the ships, chewing stale bread until their jaws ached, stretching handfuls of corn into meals too small to satisfy. Children cried at night from hunger. Mothers hushed them with lullabies, though their own stomachs twisted with emptiness. Men grew gaunt, their strength waning, their tempers short. The dream of a new life was fading, replaced by the gnawing fear that the island itself sought to starve them out. And then came the sickness. It began quietly. A boy awoke one morning with fever, his skin pale, his breath shallow. By evening, his lips were dark, his eyes glazed. Within days, others followed. Men collapsing the fields, women trembling with chills, children coughing until blood stained their lips. The sickness spread without mercy. No prayer, no herb, no remedy availed them. It swept through the colony like an invisible hand, tightening its grip until every settler lived in dread of the next cough, the next fever breath. Some whispered that the illness came from the water, tainted by unseen forces. Others believed it was a curse, punishment for setting foot upon forbidden soil. A few murmured of darker possibilities, that the sickness was not natural at all, but something summoned, something sent. Yet none dared speak such thoughts aloud for long, for even the mention of them seemed to draw the island's attention closer. The tension worsened when the settlers looked beyond their own camp. To the south and west, the native tribes watched. At first there had been uneasy peace, tentative exchanges of food and goods. But as the settlers grew hungrier, suspicion replaced courtesy. Accusations spread that the tribes hoarded food while the colonists starved. The tribes, in turn, saw the settlers as reckless intruders, cutting forests and claiming land without understanding or respect. It did not take long for violence to spark. A dispute over stolen corn led to bloodshed. A single arrow loosed in anger gave way to musket fire. Smoke rose from the trees as raiding parties struck in the night. Men died with blades in their bellies. Women fled with children clutched to their arms. And fear thickened until it was impossible to tell who was friend and who was foe. The colony was no longer a fragile dream of peace, but a fortress under siege. And yet, as deadly as hunger, sickness, and violence were, there was something worse. Something no blade could cut, no musket could shoot, no prayer could silence. It began with glimpses. A settler gathering wood at dusk saw a movement between the trees. Shadows darker than the forest, slipping silently from trunk to trunk. He called out, but no answer came. When others arrived, there was nothing to be found. Another swore that while keeping watch one night, he felt eyes upon him. He raised his musket, but the forest lay still. Then, in the corner of his vision, he saw them, figures standing among the trees, tall, unmoving, their forms half hidden by the dark. When he turned fully, the figures were gone, as if they had never been. Soon, the story spread through the settlement. Shadows moving when no wind blew. Footsteps pacing the outskirts of camp, though no one was there. Whispers heard just beyond the firelight. Voices too low to understand, too near to be imagination. At first, the settlers dismissed these tales as nerves, tricks of hunger and fatigue. But the sightings multiplied. Children who wandered too near the trees claimed they saw men made of darkness, their bodies shifting like smoke. Women fetching water swore they heard laughter echoing from the woods. Hunters returned pale and trembling, speaking of shapes that followed them no matter how far they walked. The settlers began to fear the night more than hunger, more than sickness, more than their enemies. Fire pits blazed higher. Torches were kept burning long into dawn, yet still the shadows pressed closer. The forest seemed alive with unseen watchers, patient and cruel. Some men grew desperate enough to follow the shapes, chasing them into trees with weapons raised. None ever caught what they pursued. Some returned shaken, swearing the forest had shifted around them, paths twisting until they no longer knew which way led back. Others never returned at all. As fear deepened, so too did division. The colony splintered. Some believed the shadows were spirits of the land, angered by their presence. Others thought they were tricks of the natives, meant to frighten them away. A few claimed the shapes were omens sent by God or the devil to test their resolve. Quarrels erupted. Trust crumbled. Even within families, suspicion grew. Men accused wives of hearing voices at night. Parents whispered that their children were not themselves, that something had followed them back from the woods. Paranoia seeped through the camp like smoke, choking every bond of loyalty. And then came the first death that could not be explained. It was a hunter named Elias, a man known for his courage. He had ventured into the forest with 3 others to track game. When the party returned at dusk, Elias was not with them. They said he had fallen behind, distracted by a sound in the trees. They searched, but he never answered their calls. At dawn, they found him. His body lay in a clearing, untouched by beast or blade. His musket was unbroken, his knife still at his belt. But his face was twisted into a mask of terror. His mouth open in a silent scream. His hands clutched at his chest, nails driven deep into his own flesh, as though he tried to tear something out. His eyes stared wide, unblinking, fixed on some horror no one else could see. No wound marked him. No poison was found. He looked for all the world as if fear itself had reached into his heart and stopped it cold. The settlers buried him quickly, whispering prayers, but his death lingered in every mind. Some refused to leave their huts after dark. Others spoke of leaving the island altogether. But the ships were gone and the ocean was vast. They were alone, trapped between hunger, sickness, war, and now something far darker. That night, no one slept. Fires were stoked high, torches placed at every corner of camp. Men paced with muskets in hand. Women clutched their children close. The forest loomed black and silent, its shadows deeper than ever before. And then, just as the wind died and the night fell still, someone whispered the words none wished to hear. If Elias was the first, who will be next? The flames flickered. The forest seemed to lean closer, listening. And in the silence that followed, every settler felt it, that they were no longer alone, that the shadows were not content to watch forever. Then came the night when the first colonist was found. His body twisted, as though fear itself had killed him. The colony was young, fragile, and already shrouded in unease when Governor John White made a fateful decision. Supplies were running low. Tension with the tribes was mounting. Shadows haunted the forest, and sickness spread in whispers. The settlers looked to their governor for leadership, for a steady hand to guide them through the storm. And John White, determined to save them, resolved to sail back to England for aid. It was meant to be a simple promise. He would return swiftly with food, weapons, reinforcements, everything needed to secure the settlement. He told them it would take only a few months. He told them to stay strong, to keep faith, to endure until the sails reappeared upon the horizon. But promises, once carried upon the sea, are fragile things. The day of his departure dawned gray and heavy. The sky hung low, clouds pressing down upon the island like a shroud. The settlers gathered at the shore, their faces pale with fear and weariness. Mothers clutched children who wept at the sight of the ships preparing to leave. Men stood silent, gripping tools and muskets, trying to hide their dread behind stern expressions. John White walked among them, offering words of encouragement, clasping hands, vowing he would not abandon them. His voice was steady, his eyes firm, yet Evie could not escape the heaviness in the air. He looked back at the colony, at the makeshift homes, the fields that struggled to grow, the forest that seemed always to lean closer, listening. And he knew he was leaving them to something more than hunger. He was leaving them to the island itself. The sails unfurled. The ships drifted from the shore, carried by the tide. Settlers waved and shouted, their voices breaking across the water. John White stood upon the deck, raising his hand in farewell, watching as the figures of his people grew smaller, their faces fading into the mist, and then the horizon swallowed them. The colonists stood for hours upon the beach, staring at the place where the ships had vanished, as if willing them to return. But the ocean was silent. The horizon remained empty. The settlers turned at last, shoulders bowed, and returned to the shadow of the forest. The island had them now, alone, with no lifeline, no escape. Days passed. The routines of survival resumed. But beneath every act, building, hunting, praying, there was a knowledge that their governor was gone. The thin thread that connected them to England had been cut, and they were left dangling in a world that did not welcome them. At first, they counted the days with hope. A few weeks, they told themselves. A month, perhaps two. Surely the ships would return swiftly, loaded with food, tools, and more settlers to strengthen their numbers. Every morning, they scanned the horizon for sails. Every evening, they whispered prayers that tomorrow would be the day. But the horizon remained empty. Weeks turned into months. The seasons shifted. Summer's heat gave way to autumn's chill. The forest blazing red and gold before shedding their leaves. The settlers harvested what little they could, gathering roots and nuts, fishing the rivers, stretching every morsel to survive. Yet hunger gnawed at them always, a shadow that grew longer with every passing day. By winter, despair had begun to creep into their bones. The cold cut deep, crops withered, game grew scarce. Fires were kept burning constantly, not only for warmth but for comfort, to keep away the pressing dark. Yet the flames did little to ease the sense of abandonment that grew heavier with every sunrise. They waited for John White, but the ocean gave no sign of him. No sails appeared, no message arrived, only the endless whisper of waves. As if the sea itself mocked their hope, loneliness grew unbearable. The settlers began to feel as though the rest of the world had forgotten them. England was far away, its wars and intrigues consuming all thought, leaving Roanoke a small and distant concern. They were a handful of souls marooned at the edge of the known world, surrounded by forest, shadow, and silence. And in that silence, the island pressed its advantage. The shadows in the trees grew bolder. At night, Figures were glimpsed standing just beyond the firelight, watching, unmoving. Whispers drifted through the darkness, voices calling names, luring the unwary toward the woods. Children spoke of dreams in which the sea rose up and carried them away, leaving only the forest behind. Mistrust poisoned the colony. Families quarreled. Friends turned against each other. Some blamed John White for abandoning them. Others blamed England itself, saying it had been used as pawns in a game of empire. Still others claimed the island had ensnared their governor, that he would never return because Roanoke had claimed him as it sought to claim them all. The months dragged on. Seasons turned again. Spring came with brief relief. Fresh shoots, fish returning to rivers, warmth thawing the frozen ground. For a time, hope flickered anew. But with spring came storms, tempests that lashed the coast with rain and thunder. The settlers huddled in their huts as winds screamed like voices, tearing at their walls, drowning their prayers. And still, no sails upon the horizon. By the second summer, patience had withered into bitterness. Each sunrise was another reminder that John White had not kept his promise. Each sunset deepened the certainty that he never would. Mothers no longer told children that help was coming. Fathers no longer spoke of England. Instead, they spoke of endurance, of survival at any cost. But survival has a price. Hunger returned with vengeance. Sickness lingered. Violence flared once more with neighboring tribes. Every loss was felt more deeply. For now it seemed they were truly abandoned, left to fend for themselves in a land that grew more hostile by the day. The colonists still remembered the morning they had watched the ships vanish. They remembered the governor's hand raised in farewell, his voice promising swift return. They remembered the feeling of hope, fragile yet alive. And now, years later, that memory burned like a wound that would not heal. For the ocean had taken him far away, across leagues of water, into wars and delays, into the chaos of nations. The colonists could not know it, but John White was trapped in England, unable to sail back as Spain's mighty navy blocked the seas, as politics consumed the court, as time slipped away. They waited, they endured, they prayed, but the ocean carried him away for years. 3 years had passed since Governor John White last looked upon the faces of his colonists. 3 years since he had promised them he would return swiftly. 3 years since the sails vanished beyond the horizon, leaving 120 men, women, and children waiting on an island that seemed never to forgive intruders. Those years had not been kind. In England, war with Spain had consumed every ship, every resource, every man who could be spared. The great armada thundered across the seas, and White's pleas for a return voyage were drowned out by the cries of a kingdom fighting for its life. By the time he secured passage back, storms and delays had stolen more months still. And so, when White's ship at last cut across the waters toward Roanoke, it was not weeks later, nor months, but years. The governor stood at the bow, his heart hammering, his eyes straining for the first glimpse of shore. His thoughts turned again and again to his daughter Eleanor and his infant granddaughter, Virginia Dare, the first child of English blood born in the New World. He had promised them a future. Had he returned too late? The coastline emerged in the morning mist, green forests, sandy shores, the familiar shape of the island. White's chest tightened with relief. At last he was back. He scanned the shore for movement, for the figures of colonists waving, for smoke curling from chimneys. Surely they would see his sails and come running, joy spilling from their tired faces. But the shoreline was still. The ship anchored. Small boats carried White and a handful of men toward the land. The oars dipped silently into the water. The closer they drew, the heavier the silence became. No laughter, no voices, no children's cries, no crack of musket fire in practice. Only the sound of gulls circling above, their cries harsh and lonely. White's boot struck the sand. He stepped onto the island he had left years before, his pulse quickening with dread. He expected his colonists to rush forward at any moment, to embrace him, to weep for joy. But no one came. The settlement lay ahead, just beyond the tree line. White led his men forward, each step sinking with unease. The path was overgrown, grass and weeds swallowing the trail that once bustled with footsteps. Branches sag heavy, vines curl like fingers across the way. It was as though the island had begun to reclaim what had been taken from it. And then, at last, the village came into view. It stood as though frozen in time. Huts still upright, roofs intact, fences enclosing the spaces where livestock once bleated. Tools lay scattered, hoes, axes, buckets, left what had last been held. Now dulled by rust and weather, doors hung open, but no movement stirred within. No fire smoke from the hearths. No voices rose in greeting. The colony was intact, but it was empty. White walked among the homes, his eyes searching desperately. He called out names: Eleanor, Virginia, Elias, Margaret, his voice breaking the heavy silence. But the huts gave no answer. His men fanned out, opening doors, peering inside. Each hut was the same, beds neatly arranged, belongings left as if the families had simply stepped out, but they had not stepped back in. No bodies, no signs of struggle, no blood spilled, no broken weapons, no shattered doors, no signs of flight. 120 people had lived here, men, women, children, and now not one remained. It was as if they had dissolved into air, carried away by some invisible hand. The silence pressed upon them, so heavy it seemed to smother even breath. The men shifted uneasily, clutching their weapons though no enemy showed itself. White's heart pounded with disbelief. Where had they gone? He found the fields overgrown, weeds choking the fragile rows where corn once grew. Gardens lay untended, herbs long withered. The well stood uncovered, its rope frayed. The livestock pen stood empty, their gates swinging in the wind. Everything spoke of abandonment, but nothing spoke of why. White's thoughts raced. Had they moved inland to join friendly tribes? Had they fled from enemies? Had sickness taken them all? Yet if so, where were the graves? Where were the markers of loss, the signs of burial? No ground had been disturbed. No cross stood upon the hill. The emptiness was total. As night began to fall, the men built a fire at the edge of the village. The forest loomed dark around them, branches swaying like arms in the wind. White sat apart, staring into the shadows of the empty huts. He could almost see his daughter stepping out, cradling Virginia, smiling with relief at his return. He could almost hear the laughter of children, the hammer work, the songs of prayer. But the images dissolved as quickly as they came, leaving only silence. That silence became unbearable. It was not the quiet of peace, nor the rest of sleep. It was hollow, absolute, suffocating. It seemed to echo with what was missing. The voices of 120 souls erased without trace. Some of the men swore they heard whispers in the trees at night. Others claimed to see flickers of movement, shadows slipping between the trunks. One said he glimpsed a pale figure watching from the edge of the firelight, gone when he turned. None spoke of it aloud. The emptiness was enough to chill them without summoning ghosts. At dawn, White resumed his search. He scoured every corner of the settlement, every path, every field. And then, upon a tree at the edge of the village, he saw it, carved deep into the bark. The letters gouged with deliberate hand. CROATOAN. One word, one mystery. No sign of life, no body, no struggle. Only this word, etched into the wood as if to speak for the vanished. White ran his fingers across the grooves, his mind reeling. CROATOAN, the name of a nearby island, home to allies among the natives. Was it a clue, a direction, a desperate message from those he had left behind? Or was it something else, a warning, a mark of doom, a word left by the very thing that had taken them? The men gathered around, staring at the word as though it might speak. But the tree was silent. The island was silent. The entire colony was silent. 120 souls had vanished into nothing. Only one word remained, carved into a tree. The tree stood silent in the clearing, its bark rough, its roots sinking deep into the soil of Roanoke. Yet upon its trunk was carved a word that would outlive kingdoms, echoing down the centuries like a curse. CROATOAN. The letters were deep, deliberate, gouged with a steady hand. They had not been scratched in haste. nor etched in panic. Whoever cut them had taken time, had wanted them seen, had left them as a message or a warning. Governor John White stood before the tree, his heart pounding. He had searched for his daughter, for his granddaughter, for the colonists he had abandoned to the island's silence. Instead, he found only this single word, as if the voices of 120 souls had been swallowed, leaving behind only their final breath. CROATOAN. It was the name of a nearby island, home to allies among the native CROATOAN people. White clung to hope. Perhaps his colonists had moved there, seeking safety. Perhaps the word was a sign, a message meant for him, guiding him to where they waited still. And yet, there was something unsettling about it. The way the letters seemed to pulse in the light, as though alive. The way the sound of the word lingered in the air when spoken, heavy, unnatural. CROATOAN. It rolled like thunder, like the whisper of something vast and unseen. It felt less like a name and more like a spell. The men around White shifted uneasily, their eyes flicking from the word to the empty huts, the overgrown fields, the silence pressing upon them. One muttered that it was a curse. Another swore that the carving was too clean, too fresh, as if made not years ago but only days before. Yet no footprints marked the ground, no voices stirred the air. Only the word. Determined, White ordered a search. They would sail to CROATOAN Island, question the tribes, scour every shore and forest. But fate denied him even this chance. Storms rose with violent fury, lashing the ships, tearing sails, driving them back from the coast. Each attempt to reach the island was thwarted, as though the sea itself conspired to keep them from the truth. Supplies dwindled, tempers frayed, and in the end, White was forced to abandon the search. He returned to England with nothing but the word. And so the legend was born. CROATOAN became more than a name. It became a mystery, a riddle carved into the heart of history. For centuries, men and women would speak it with awe, with fear, with endless speculation. What had it meant? Was it a destination? A plea? A curse? Or was it the last word of a people already claimed by forces beyond understanding? Investigators came in time, explorers and scholars seeking to solve the riddle. They sailed to CROATOAN Island, searched the villages, questioned the people, but no trace of the colonists was ever found. No graves, no bones, no belongings that could be tied to the lost 120. It was as though they had never existed at all. Some believe the colonists had been absorbed into native tribes, living and dying as part of a new community. Their English blood mingling with another people. But if so, why no sign, no story, no clear evidence? The tribe spoke little, and what little they said was veiled, reluctant, as though some things were better left unspoken. Others argued the colonists had fled deeper inland, seeking refuge in the vast wilderness. Perhaps they perished there, claimed by hunger, disease, or the merciless forests. Yet again, no proof surfaced. No bones, no artifacts, no trace of 120 lives. And still the word lingered. CROATOAN. It appeared not just in Roanoke's tale, but in whispers that surfaced elsewhere. Sailors told of ships lost at sea, their decks empty, their crews vanished, with only the word carved into the timbers. A child struck with fever murmured it with his dying breath. A storm that tore through a village left the word etched into shattered beams. Always the same word. Always the same chill. Some said it was a name not of a place, but of a force. An ancient spirit bound to the land, older than tribes, older than men. A spirit that demanded sacrifice, that marked those it claimed with its name. CROATOAN, a word not left by the colonists, but carved by what consumed them. John White lived the rest of his days with the word burning in his mind. He had crossed oceans, begged kings, endured storms, but he never found his daughter, his granddaughter, his people. He never knew whether they had lived or died, whether they had been saved or damned. All he carried to his grave was a word, carved deep into history, mocking him with its silence. Time passed. Centuries rolled on. Empires rose and fell. The world changed, yet the mystery remained. Roanoke's silence became legend, and the word CROATOAN became its haunting refrain. Scholars debated, theories multiplied, stories grew. Some saw it as nothing more than a simple clue, a direction pointing to allies. Others felt the weight of something darker, something that no logic could explain away. For the island remained. The forest still whispered, and those who walked its paths swore they felt eyes upon them, swore they heard voices in the leaves. Some explorers reported seeing shadows move between the trees, shapes that did not belong to any living tribe or beast. A few returned shaken, speaking of laughter in the night, of whispers calling them by name, and always the word lingered. CROATOAN, not just history, not just a carving on a tree, but something that pulsed through the very air of the place. The colonists were gone, but their absence was not empty. It was full of silence, full of questions, full of something that refused to die. The word remained, alive, echoing through the centuries, growing heavier with every retelling. What if the colonists had not fled? What if they had not been taken by war or hunger or sickness? What if they had been claimed by the island itself, absorbed into the shadows, dissolved into the soil, their voices now whispering through the trees? CROATOAN, not a message, but a mark, not a clue, but a claim. And so the legend grew until some swore the forest itself had swallowed them whole. The word CROATOAN carved into the tree was the only trace of Roanoke's colonists. No bodies, no graves, no smoke rising from distant fires. Just silence and a word that refused to explain itself. From the moment John White returned to England empty-handed, the world began to whisper, and those whispers soon grew into theories, each darker, stranger, and more forbidden than the last. The first theory was simple. Perhaps the colonists had been taken by force. The tribes of surrounding lands were many, and not all were friendly. It was easy to imagine a raid, a sudden eruption of violence in which men, women, and children were swept away or slaughtered. Yet no signs of struggle marked the settlement. No broken walls, no bloodstains, no bodies. If such a massacre had taken place, why had the attackers left the homes intact, the tools scattered, the fields untouched? Even war leaves scars. Roanoke bore none. A second theory whispered of starvation. The settlers had struggled to survive even in White's time. Crops had failed. Food had dwindled. Hunger gnawed at their bones. Perhaps, in desperation, the colonists had turned on one another. Cannibalism was not unknown in the age of exploration. At Jamestown, years later, it would be recorded openly. Could the same horror have taken place here? Could neighbors have fed upon neighbors, families upon families, until none remained? Yet again, no bones were found. No gnawed remains, no pits of ash. If cannibalism had come to Roanoke, it left no trace. Others imagined rebellion. Perhaps the settlers had risen against their leaders or against one another. Tempers, after all, had always run hot on the island. John White himself had seen division, suspicion, and quarrels. Could violent uprising have torn the colony apart? But who then had survived to carve CROATOAN, and where had they gone? Assimilation offered a kinder theory. Perhaps the settlers had abandoned their fragile colony and joined with neighboring tribes, seeking food, safety, and community. There were whispers of fair-haired children glimpsed in native villages decades later, children who spoke a broken mix of English and tribal tongues. Yet proof was scarce, and those who searched never found a clear line back to Roanoke. The colonists had not simply merged with another people. They had disappeared whole. But some minds refused such earthly explanations. Some whispered of things far stranger. There were those who said the colonists had been taken not by men, but by the land itself. Roanoke, they argued, was cursed long before the English set foot upon it. The native tribes would not live there. They spoke of spirits, of restless forces that prowled the forest and haunted the soil. Perhaps the settlers had been swallowed into the trees, their bodies dissolved into bark, their voices bound to the wind. Others believed the sea had claimed them. At night, colonists had spoken of lights beneath the waves, of shapes moving in the deep. What if those shapes had risen at last, walking upon the land, dragging the settlers back into the ocean's black heart? No storm, no wreckage, no cries would remain. Only silence and the word they left behind. And then there were the wildest theories of all, whispered only in hushed tones, for fear that even speaking them might invite their truth. Some said Roanoke was a thin place, where the fabric between worlds wore thin as silk. The settlers, they claimed, had stepped through without knowing, crossed into another realm, a place beyond sight, beyond time, where they linger still, lost and unable to return. Perhaps CROATOAN was not a name at all, but the key, the word that opened the doorway. Others imagine interdimensional vanishings, portals that yawn open in the forest or the sky. Perhaps one night, without warning, the settlers were taken all at once, snatched into another reality where they wander still, shadows seeking a home they will never find. And there were darker whispers still, of ancient curses tied to the soil, of gods older than memory, hungry for sacrifice. Some claimed the island itself was alive, a vast being disguised as land and trees. It had lured them, fed upon them, absorbed them, leaving only an empty village behind. CROATOAN, they said, was not a clue, but the name of what had devoured them. Through the centuries, each generation added its own fear to the tale. Theories grew, twisted, multiplied. The truth became more elusive with every passing year, until the mystery was no longer a question of history, but a legend of terror. But the most chilling part of the story is this. The vanishings did not end with Roanoke. Explorers who came later sometimes reported strange things. They spoke of camps where men vanished without a sound, their weapons and packs left behind. They told of footprints in the sand that ended abruptly, as if the person had simply stepped out of existence. They told of whispers in the woods calling their names, of lights that led them astray until they woke days later, lost and starving. One sailor swore that while anchored near Roanoke, he saw pale figures moving on the shore, walking in silence among the trees. He thought they were survivors until he realized they left no footprints in sand. When he called out, the figures turned, their faces hollow, their eyes black, before fading into the forest like smoke. Stories such as these spread quickly, woven into the fabric of the legend. Roanoke was no longer just a tale of a lost colony. It became something larger, something darker, a place where people vanished, where the earth itself seemed hungry, where the word CROATOAN was less a clue and more a curse. Even in later centuries, the word surfaced in uncanny ways. A lost ship drifting empty, found with CROATOAN carved into its mast. A man struck by fever in the 19th century, his final breath whispering the word. A poet, haunted by visions, writing the word again and again in his notebook before his death. Always the same word, always the same weight. No matter where it appeared, it carried the echo of Roanoke, as if the colony's silence still rippled outward, touching lives far removed from that lonely island. And so the forbidden theories remain. Were the colonists taken by hunger, by war, by their own desperation? Or were they claimed by something greater, something beyond the reach of history, something that still lingers, whispering to the trees of Roanoke? The truth lies buried, perhaps forever. But one thing is certain. The silence of 120 souls was only the beginning. For as the years passed, others too began to vanish. And then explorers began to vanish too. Time has a way of burying stories, softening their edges until they fade into legend. Yet the story of Roanoke never faded. It lingered, whispering across centuries, drawing the curious and the fearful alike to the island where 120 souls had vanished without a trace. And though history recorded it as mystery, the land itself seemed unwilling to let the tale rest. Generations after the colony's disappearance, sailors spoke of strange lights flickering along the coast. Lanterns, they said, bobbing in the darkness of the trees, moving with a rhythm too steady, too human, to be accident. Yet when they drew near, no hand held them, no torch burned, and the lights winked out as if swallowed by the night. Locals who ventured near the island told of figures glimpsed at the edge of the forest. Pale shapes standing motionless, their faces half seen, their forms blurred like smoke. Some swore they were men and women dressed in old-fashioned garb, their collars stiff, their cloaks heavy, their eyes hollow with longing. Others claimed the figures did not walk but drifted, their feet leaving no mark upon the earth. Hunters said that at dawn, when the mist clung thick over the ground, they heard voices, soft, distant, yet unmistakable. The words were old, their accents foreign, English spoken as it had been centuries before. Commands, prayers, lullabies. A woman's voice calling a child's name. A man shouting to unseen companions. Then silence, sudden and absolute, leaving the listener shivering as though the world itself had leaned close to whisper in their ear. The tales grew darker still. Travelers told of following the voices into the woods, only to become lost for hours, sometimes days, before stumbling back with no memory of where they had wandered. Others said they dreamed of the colonists, their faces gaunt, their lips cracked, their eyes filled with despair, endlessly reliving their final days. And some woke from those dreams to find themselves standing outside in the night, their feet bare, the forest looming close. The island earned a reputation it could not escape. To some, it was cursed. To others, haunted. And to a few, it was something worse, a place where the boundary between the living and the dead, the real and the unreal, was thinner than anywhere else. As the centuries turned, the stories did not cease. They multiplied. Explorers who landed on Roanoke in later ages described the uncanny stillness of the place. Birds fell silent as if the trees themselves were listening. The air grew heavy, pressing upon the chest until breathing was difficult. Tools misplaced in camp reappeared in odd places, as though carried by unseen hands. And always at night came the voices. One diary, kept by a man who stayed on the island for 3 nights, told a figure that stood outside his tent each evening. At first, he thought it a trick of the firelight, a shadow cast by branches. But on the 3rd night, when he stepped outside, the figure was waiting. It was a woman, pale as moonlight, her clothing torn but strangely old, her face streaked with sorrow. She raised her hand as if to speak. But when he moved closer, she dissolved into mist. The man fled the island at dawn and never returned. Even the sea seemed touched by the mystery. Sailors reported hearing laughter carried over the waves when no land was near. Others swore their ships were followed by ghostly lights that danced upon the water, leading them perilously close to reefs before vanishing. One captain claimed that, on a still night, he heard a voice cry his name from the darkness, spoken in the accent of Elizabethan England. Legends clung to the word itself, CROATOAN. Some said if spoken aloud on the island at midnight. The voices would answer. A few dared to try. Their accounts varied. Some heard cries of anguish, others heard weeping, and some heard nothing at all. But each one left the island shaken, convinced the word was not just a clue carved into bark, but a tether to whatever force lingered there. And still, the pale figures remained. Farmers on the mainland told of seeing them across the water, lined at the treeline, staring outward as though waiting. Travelers passing by at night saw them gathered in groups, their faces lit faintly by an unseen glow, their mouths moving in silence. A few swore the figures beckoned to them, raising arms as though inviting them closer. These were not the restless dead of ordinary ghost tales. They did not wail, did not scream, did not lash out in fury. They watched, they lingered, they repeated the fragments of lives torn from them, endlessly, as though trapped between worlds. And always there was a silence, the same suffocating silence John White had found centuries before. The silence a colony abandoned not by accident, but by something far larger, something that could erase 120 souls as easily as a tide erases footprints in sand. Over time, curiosity grew. Scholars, archaeologists, and adventurers returned to the island, seeking answers. They searched for bones, for tools, for artifacts that might prove what became of settlers. Some found fragments, broken pottery, rusted weapons, faint traces of gardens now lost to weeds. Yet nothing explained the whole. Nothing revealed why a thriving colony had ceased to exist. But in their searches, they uncovered something else. They spoke of strange impressions in the soil, as if the ground itself remembered what had happened. Circles burned into the earth with no sign of fire. Stones arranged in patterns too deliberate to be natural. And once, a set of footprints, bare human, yet pressed deep as though made not by flesh, but by something heavier, something unseen. The discoveries unsettled even the bravest. Some researchers abandoned their work, unwilling to spend another night on the island. Others pressed on, determined to solve the riddle, only to return home haunted by dreams they could not shake. For Roanoke was not done with them. Those who lingered long enough began to see more than lights, more than figures. They heard names spoken in the wind, names recorded in history, names of the lost colonists themselves. They heard children laughing in the distance, fading into cries. They heard prayers whispered in the old tongue of Elizabethan England, words heavy with despair. And when they closed their eyes, they saw faces staring back at them, pleading, accusing, begging to be remembered. It was as if the colony had not vanished at all, but had been caught in a loop, repeating its final moments endlessly, a phantom echo trapped between time and eternity. And yet, for all the sightings, all the whispers, no one ever found them. No graves, no bones, no bodies, only fragments, only shadows, only voices. The phantom colony lived on not in flesh, but in the inescapable presence that clung to Roanoke like mist. And still, the mystery deepened, for in time, explorers began to dig, not just for answers, but for proof. They pressed into the soil, prying up earth that had lain undisturbed for centuries. And what they found unsettled them even more than the silence, even more than the phantoms, because the strangest discoveries were yet to come, buried beneath the soil itself. For centuries, the silence of Roanoke was explanation enough. No bodies, no graves, no signs of struggle, just emptiness, and a single word carved into a tree. But in time, the world grew hungry for more than whispers. Curiosity demanded evidence. And so, spades cut into the soil, prying secrets in the ground that had lain undisturbed since the colonists vanished. At first, the discoveries seemed ordinary. Fragments of pottery, rusted iron nails, tools of English make, left behind as the settlement fell into silence. But then came the bones. Not many, not enough to account for 120 souls, but scattered fragments lying deep beneath the earth, far older than the colony itself. Archaeologists bent close to examine them. The shape of the bones was human, or almost human, skulls elongated in ways that defied anatomy, teeth worn in patterns unknown to any tribe. The femur of one skeleton was thicker, denser, as though it belonged to something larger, heavier, stronger than a man. Tests revealed an impossible truth. These remains were not from the 1500s. They were thousands of years older. The land of Roanoke, it seemed, bore the bones of people who should not exist. More excavations revealed tools scattered among the bones. But they were not the tools of English settlers, nor the tribes of the region. Some were shaped from stone, but polished to a sheen so fine it rivaled metal. Others were crafted of materials unrecognizable, substances harder than iron, yet lighter than wood. Symbols were carved into them, swirling marks that echoed no known language, no record in history. The ground beneath Roanoke was not just earth. It was a library, a palimpsest of forgotten lives, a graveyard of civilizations no one remembered. Whispers spread quickly. Had the English settlers built their fragile homes atop a place already claimed? Was Roanoke not a beginning, but an echo of something far older, something erased before memory began? Perhaps the colonists had not vanished at all, but had been swallowed by the same fate that erased those before them. Some of the bones suggested rituals, skulls arranged in circles, spines laid carefully in patterns, as if offerings to unseen forces. Fire pits filled not with ashes of wood, but with blackened stone, melted as though by unnatural heat. And among them, fragments of masks carved with faces twisted into expressions of terror or awe. The air around the dig sites grew heavy. Tools broke without cause. Compasses spun uselessly. Workers reported dizziness, nausea, voices murmuring just out of hearing. Some swore the bones shifted when no one watched, rearranging themselves in the earth as if remembering their original shapes. One night, a guard stationed at the site claimed to see figures moving among the trenches, pale half-formed, their bodies draped in rags not of any known fashion. They bent over the bones, touching them tenderly, as though recognizing old friends. When the guard raised his lantern, the figures dissolved into shadow. Word reached scholars across the sea. Some dismissed the finds as errors, misdated bones, misidentified tools. But others saw in them a far darker possibility. What if Roanoke was not an accident in history, but a doorway, a threshold between worlds where civilization stepped and vanished, leaving only fragments behind? The native tribes had always avoided the island, speaking of it as cursed. They told of ancient ones who lived there before any people now remembered. Spirits bound to the soil, neither alive nor dead, jealous of intruders. Perhaps the bones were theirs. Perhaps the colonists had joined them. But strangers still with artifacts that did not belong to any age. A shard of pottery glazed in colors impossible to produce with the kilns of antiquity. A metal disc etched with concentric circles that glowed faintly under moonlight. A blade sharper than steel, yet uncorroded by centuries in the earth. These objects defied not just history, but time itself. They hinted at knowledge lost, or knowledge not of this world at all. Theories multiplied. Some spoke of civilizations erased deliberately, their memories struck from the record, their bones buried deep as warning. Others whispered of visitors not of Earth, who had touched the land long before ships crossed the ocean, leaving behind fragments of their presence. And still others believed Roanoke itself was no mere island, but a wound in the world, a place where time folded, where the remnants of countless lost peoples bled together. Every discovery only deepened the mystery. One archaeologist wrote in his journal that he uncovered a child's skull, small and delicate, its features unmistakably human. Yet in its eye sockets lay fragments of crystal, fused to the bone as though the child's eyes had been replaced or transformed. The archaeologist sealed the skull in a crate, but when he opened it again days later, the crystals were gone and the bone had turned to dust. Another claimed to find a set of footprints preserved in clay. They were human, 5 toes, the arch of a foot, but alongside them ran prints not of man, not a beast, but something in between, elongated to loned, pressing deeper than any human step. The trail ended abruptly, as if both man and monster had simply ceased to exist. The deeper they dug, the more the island resisted. Equipment failed. Maps grew unreliable. Workers deserted, muttering of nightmares that followed them even when awake. And through it all, the silence of the place grew heavier, as if the ground itself resented being disturbed. The question hung unspoken. Had the colonists of Roanoke uncovered these same bones? Had they built their fragile homes upon a graveyard of civilizations erased? And in doing so, awakened what claimed them all? The soil told a story stranger than the colony itself. A story of peoples unknown, of tools that should not exist, of rituals older than history. A story that whispered of cycles, settlements built, lives lived, and then vanishings again and again, each leaving behind less than the last, until finally nothing remained but silence. And perhaps Roanoke was simply the latest to join them. As the archaeologists packed their crates and abandoned the island, none could shake the feeling that they had touched something forbidden, that they had brushed against the edge of a truth too vast for men to hold. The bones should not have existed. The tools should not have existed. Yet they were there, undeniable, carved into the earth itself. And in the silence of Roanoke, as the wind moved through the trees, some swore they heard it still. The faint rustle of voices, the echo of lives erased, the soil itself whispering of civilizations gone before, civilizations swallowed whole, civilizations forgotten long before the English ever dreamed a new world. The soil whispered of civilizations erased before even Roanoke existed. Legends are not always born from answers. Sometimes they are born from silence, from questions that linger like shadows long after the world has moved on. The Lost Colony of Roanoke was one such legend, a settlement of men, women, and children who vanished without a trace. A word carved into a tree, a silence that echoed across centuries. But perhaps the true story of Roanoke was never about disappearance at all. Perhaps it was about something far more unsettling, permanence. For the colonists never truly left, not in the way we think. They remained woven into the land, into the whispers of the forest, into the imaginations of every generation that dared to ask what became of them. The island itself seems to remember. Step upon its soil, and the silence is heavier than any silence should be. Walk its forest, and you feel the weight of unseen eyes. Listen at night, and you may hear voices carried on the wind, faint, strained, as if calling across time. a lullaby in Old English, a prayer whispered to God who no longer answers, a cry of fear cut short. To some, these are ghosts, pale remnants of lives stolen too soon, trapped in endless repetition. The phantom colony, wandering still, their story never finished. But to others, what lingers is something stronger, stranger, not echoes, but presences, not memories, but lives that continue in ways we cannot comprehend. For if history teaches us anything, it is that Roanoke did not vanish. It survived in rumor, in sighting, in dream. It lives on every time a traveler swears they saw pale figures watching from a tree lean. It breathes each time a voice is heard in the dark, speaking words centuries out of date. It grows each time archaeologists dig and uncover bones that should not exist, artifacts that do not belong. The colony persists because we cannot bury it. It clings to us. It demands to be remembered. And what if memory is not enough? What if the settlers themselves endure, not as spirits, not as shadows, but as something caught between? Some say they are trapped between worlds, frozen at the moment of their vanishing, walking endlessly in silence, waiting for release. Others believe they merge with the land itself, their bodies and souls claimed by the soil, their voices forever whispering through the trees. And a few whisper something worse, that they are not lost, but watching, waiting, hungering for others to join them. The forest still holds its secrets. Stand at its edge at dusk, and you may see movement within, shapes shifting, figures half-formed. Call out, and the silence deepens, as though something has heard you and is deciding whether to answer. Step closer, and perhaps you will find footprints in the dirt, fresh though no one has passed. Or perhaps you will hear your name spoken, soft and low, in a voice you almost recognize but know cannot be alive. The sea, too, remembers. Sailors still tell of voices on the waves, laughter in the distance when no land is near. Some have seen lanterns gliding upon the shore of Roanoke, too many, too bright, as if the colony still lived, still moved, still breathed. Yet when dawn comes, the island is empty, always empty. And what of the word? CROATOAN. It lingers still, etched not just into bark, but into history itself. A word that refuses to die, that appears in the strangest places, tied always to vanishings, to loss, to mystery. It has become more than a clue. It has become a name, a curse, perhaps the name of the thing that claimed the colonists, perhaps the name they themselves whispered as they crossed into whatever awaited them. The lost colony is not lost. It is here now forever, in the silence, in the whispers, in the unbroken mystery. It has become part of us, a reminder that some questions do not fade, some stories do not end, and some places cannot be tamed. Perhaps the settlers never died. Perhaps they walk still at the edge of the trees, watching, waiting, living a life beyond our comprehension. Perhaps they're the lights in the forest, the voices in the dark, the shadows that follow just out of sight. Perhaps when you step upon the island, you are not alone and never were, for the colony did not vanish. It endured. It endures still. And so, the legend of Roanoke is not a tale of death, but survival. Twisted, eternal, inexplicable survival. A colony that lives on not in history books, but in the fabric of mystery itself. A colony that refuses to rest. A colony that calls to us still, across oceans, across centuries, across the fragile barrier between the known and the unknown. Listen closely and you may hear them. Look closely and you may see them. But beware, if you hear your name spoken in the shadows, if you see a pale figure beckon from the trees, do not follow. For those who follow seldom return, and those who do are never quite the same. The mystery of Roanoke does not end. It waits. The colony of Roanoke did not vanish into nothing. It lingers in silence, in whispers, in the questions that refuse to die. Some say the settlers became shadows. Others believe they are still there, hidden just beyond the trees, waiting for the world to listen. What truly happened may never be known, but the mystery itself endures, haunting every generation that dares to ask. And that is the power of legends like this. They do not end, they grow. They travel across centuries, weaving themselves into our thoughts, our fears, our wonder. Roanoke is not just a story of loss. It is a story of how the unknown can live on forever in every curious mind that refuses to let it rest. If this tale has left you looking over your shoulder, if it stirred questions you cannot shake, if it reminded you that the world still holds secrets buried in its soil and shadows, then you are part of keeping these stories alive. So step further into the unknown with us. Like this video, if the mystery of Roanoke stirred something in you, share it with those who love forgotten histories and whispered legends. Leave your thoughts in the comments. What do you believe became of the colonists? And if you wish to journey deeper into the lost, the cursed, and the unexplained, subscribe now. Because Roanoke is only one story. There are countless others waiting in the dark. Civilizations have vanished, places cursed by time, and mysteries that have never been solved. The past is not silent. It waits to be heard. And here, together, we will listen.